At dinner, my sister's rich new boyfriend made fun of my clothes, my job, even the way I talk, and everyone laughed. My husband told me to stop making a scene, so I stayed quiet. But when the guy started bragging about his job, I took out my phone. The moment their proud smiles faded, I finally felt like I took my power back. Charming in a throwback kind of way. That's how Dominic described my accent in front of my entire family. My sister's new boyfriend, this polished private equity guy in a suit that cost more than my car payment, had just called me charming the way you'd call a garage sale fine charming. Quaint. Outdated. Worth a chuckle but not much else. Everyone laughed. My mother. My father. Vanessa, who was supposed to be my sister. Even Matteo, my own husband, squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Please don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." I'd spent 29 years not making scenes. 29 years being the practical daughter, the boring sister, the wife who knew when to stay quiet. And in that moment, sitting at my parents' perfectly set dinner table while a stranger mocked everything about me, I realized something. I was done being quiet. Because Dominic had no idea who he was actually talking to. None of them did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up at that dinner table in the first place, invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. My name is Sienna. I'm 29, married to Matteo, and for most of my adult life, I've been the daughter my parents introduced last, if they introduced me at all. This is Vanessa, our youngest, my mother Patricia would say at charity events, her voice warm with pride. She works in luxury brand consulting. Just brilliant with her clients. Then she'd gesture vaguely in my direction. And this is Sienna, our practical one. Practical. The word landed like a diagnosis every single time. I learned to translate Harrington speak early. Practical meant boring. Stable meant unambitious. Our practical one meant the daughter we don't brag about at country club brunches. My younger sister Vanessa was never practical. Vanessa was magnetic, beautiful, ambitious in all the ways that photographed well and sounded impressive in conversation. She'd been the golden child since birth. Literally. My mother had her baby pictures professionally shot and framed throughout the house like museum pieces. My baby pictures were in a box somewhere in the attic. Vanessa worked in luxury brand consulting, which as far as I could tell meant telling wealthy people how to spend their money on things they absolutely didn't need. But it came with an impressive title and clients whose names you'd recognize from magazine covers. So my parents treated her career like she'd cured a disease. I worked in HR. Or at least that's what they thought. To my family, HR meant filing paperwork and planning office birthday parties. Administrative work for people who couldn't handle real business. My mother once described my job to her book club as helping with employee things, the way you describe a child's lemonade stand, sweet but not serious. They had no idea I'd left that corporate HR job 5 years ago. They had no idea I'd started my own company. They had no idea Streamwave Solutions, my HR tech platform that helped companies manage talent acquisition without drowning in spreadsheets and unconscious bias, had hit 8 figures in revenue last year. Why would they know? They'd never asked. My mother Patricia ran our family like a Fortune 500 corporation. Every Sunday dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance. The napkins were color-coordinated with the season. The wine came from her reserve collection, which she mentioned at least twice per meal. Even casual conversations were strategic moves in an endless game of appearing successful. The house itself was a monument to achievement, or at least the appearance of it. Original artwork on the walls, purchased because the artist was someone important my mother had met at a gala. Furniture that looked expensive because it was expensive, chosen by an interior designer whose name my mother dropped regularly. Everything curated, everything intentional, everything designed to broadcast success to anyone who walked through the door. My father Robert, semi-retired from investment banking, measured people the way jewelers appraise diamonds, quickly, calculating their worth based on observable markers. Your watch. Your shoes. Your posture. The firmness of your handshake. I'd watched him size up Vanessa's boyfriends a dozen times, his eyes tracking details while his mouth made polite small talk. I'd felt him size me up too over and over, and watched him find me wanting every single time. I didn't measure up in the Harrington value system. Not because I'd failed, but because I succeeded quietly in ways they couldn't brag about. I chose what they thought was a safe HR career instead of something entrepreneurial. I married Matteo, A high school history teacher with a genuine love for his students and a Midwestern earnestness that read as unsophisticated to my parents. I wore clearance rack dresses to dinners where Vanessa arrived in designer labels that cost more than my monthly mortgage. At family gatherings, my mother introduced Vanessa first, listing her accomplishments like auction items. Then she gestured to me with that tight smile mothers give disappointing children and say, "And this is Sienna, our practical one." The disappointment. The boring daughter. The one who'd settled. Mateo tried so hard to fit in. Every Sunday he'd put on his nicest button-down shirt, the one I'd ironed carefully that morning, and attempt conversation with my father about the economy or current events. But his teacher's salary and genuine kindness made him easy to dismiss in my parents' world. "Still shaping young minds, Mateo?" my father would ask with the exact enthusiasm someone reserves for discussing dental procedures. "Yes, sir," Mateo would reply, trying to match my father's energy. "We just started a unit on the civil rights movement. The students are really engaged with the primary sources." "That's nice," my father would interrupt, already turning away to refill his scotch glass. My mother was worse in her own quiet way. She'd smile tightly whenever Mateo mentioned his students, as if public education was something unfortunate that happened to other people's families. Something vaguely embarrassing like financial trouble or a relative in rehab. I'd watch my husband shrink a little more each Sunday. His shoulders would curve inward. His voice would get quieter. His hand would find mine under the table, squeezing gently, our silent code for "we're surviving this together." We were surviving. Barely. But I never told him about Streamwave Solutions. Never mentioned the late nights I spent refining code and pitching to investors. Never showed him the bank statements or the acquisition offers from major investment firms. I kept it hidden the same way I kept everything hidden at these dinners. Silent, small, taking up as little space as possible. Why bother sharing success with people who'd already decided you were a failure? Vanessa cycled through boyfriends the way other people changed seasonal decorations. Every few months, a new one would appear at Sunday dinner. Polished, wealthy, impressive in exactly the ways my parents valued. Investment bankers. Tech startup founders. Men who used words like disruption and synergy like they were casting actual spells. My parents treated each of Vanessa's relationships like potential merger opportunities. My father would grill her boyfriends about their career trajectories and investment strategies. My mother would mentally calculate their social value, already planning which friends to introduce them to at her next charity gala. Meanwhile, my marriage to Mateo, built on actual love and partnership instead of resumes and stock portfolios, was treated like a consolation prize. "At least she's settled," my mother told her book club friend last year while I stood in her kitchen arranging cheese on a platter. She said it like I'd given up on life at 29. Like marrying a teacher and working in what she thought was corporate HR was the emotional equivalent of early retirement. I pretended not to hear. I was excellent at pretending. I pretended not to notice 1,000 other small cruelties. The way my father's eyes glazed over when I spoke. The way my mother seated me at the far end of the table during holiday dinners, positioned between elderly relatives hard of hearing and children too young for adult conversation. The way Vanessa's smallest accomplishments were celebrated with champagne while my actual achievements went completely unnoticed. But I kept a mental ledger. Every dismissal, every condescending comment, every time I was introduced as our practical one, I filed it away like receipts in a folder marked evidence of everything wrong with this family. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd risen above their shallow obsession with status and appearances. I was building something meaningful, something that actually helped people while they played their endless games of social positioning. I was lying to myself. It mattered. All of it mattered. Every slight carved a little deeper, left me a little smaller, made me question whether I was actually worth seeing or if maybe my parents were right and I really was just practical, just stable, just fundamentally unimpressive. Then Vanessa called that Sunday afternoon, and I knew immediately this boyfriend would be different. "He's not like the others," she gushed, her voice pitched high with performative excitement. "He's in private equity. Works with international portfolios. He went to Wharton." I could practically hear my mother's heart rate spike through the phone. "That sounds great," I said, folding laundry in our small apartment bedroom, only half listening. Vanessa's boyfriends were all interchangeable to me. Expensive suits wrapped around fragile egos. "Mom's already planning the entire dinner," Vanessa continued. She wants everything perfect. You're still coming Sunday, right? As if I had a choice. As if skipping Sunday dinner was ever actually an option in the Harrington family. When I told Matteo about the upcoming dinner, he sighed the way people do when facing something inevitable and unpleasant. He was grading papers at our kitchen table, red pen in hand, looking tired in that specific way teachers do in October when the school year's initial enthusiasm has worn off but winter break is still impossibly far away. Maybe this one will be decent, he offered without looking up from a student's essay about the American Revolution. I didn't have the heart to tell him that decent wasn't what my parents valued. Impressive was. Successful was. Wealthy was. Decent was just another word for practical, and we both knew how that word translated in Harrington speak. That evening, I stood in front of our bedroom closet staring at the same navy dress I'd worn to the last 3 family dinners. It was simple, appropriate, inoffensive. It was also completely invisible, exactly like me at these gatherings. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had I become so small? When had I started apologizing for my existence just by walking into a room? My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Dinner at 6 sharp. Don't be late. And Sienna, please make an effort with your appearance. First impressions matter. I'd been having Sunday dinners with my parents for 29 years. Apparently, I still hadn't made a good first impression. Sunday arrived with the inevitability of a dental appointment. Matteo drove us to my parents' house in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. I stared out the window watching familiar neighborhoods blur past, each house bigger than the last as we got closer to the Harrington estate. Estate. That's what my mother called it. To everyone else, it was just a large house in an expensive suburb, but Patricia Harrington didn't do modesty. We pulled into the circular driveway at 5:58. 2 minutes early, which in my mother's world meant we were cutting it dangerously close. The house looked like Martha Stewart had staged an intervention. Candles flickered in every window, their warm glow carefully calculated to suggest both elegance and welcome. Classical music drifted from somewhere inside, something orchestral and expensive sounding. Even the front door wreath looked professionally arranged, autumn leaves and berries positioned with the kind of precision that suggested someone had been paid well for their time. My mother opened the door before we could knock. She was wearing her important guest pearls, the strand she reserved for impressing people who mattered. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile bright and completely artificial. "Darling," she said, kissing my cheek while her eyes performed a rapid full-body scan of my outfit. I watched her smile tighten microscopically when she registered the familiar navy dress. The same one. "How lovely," she said, her tone conveying the exact opposite. "Matteo, wonderful to see you." She ushered us inside with the efficiency of someone managing traffic flow at an event. The dining room table was visible from the entryway, and I could already see it was set with military precision. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. Silverware was arranged in perfect alignment. The napkins, burgundy because autumn, were folded into some elaborate shape I couldn't identify. "Vanessa and Dominic are in the living room," my mother said, already moving in that direction. "Come meet him." We followed her into the living room and there they were. Vanessa practically vibrated with excitement on the cream-colored sofa, positioned perfectly beside her prize catch. She'd worn a designer dress I recognized from her Instagram, something with a label that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her makeup was camera-ready, her hair styled in loose waves that had probably taken an hour to achieve but were meant to look effortless. And beside her sat Dominic Laurent. 32 according to Vanessa's breathless phone summary. Tan in that way that suggested recent tropical vacations or expensive tanning memberships. His dark hair was styled with just enough product to look intentional without looking overdone. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him so perfectly it could only be custom-tailored, paired with a watch that caught the light when he moved his wrist. He stood when we entered, smooth and practiced, like he'd been trained for exactly this moment. "Sienna." Vanessa jumped up, her enthusiasm pitched high for maximum performance value. "This is Dominic. Dom, this is my older sister and her husband Matteo." Dominic extended his hand with a smile so white and perfect it looked engineered. "Pleasure to meet you both," he said, his voice warm and confident. "Vanessa's told me so much about her family." His handshake was firm, practiced, The kind they teach at executive networking seminars. Not too strong, not too weak, just enough pressure to convey confidence and competence. Nice to meet you, I said, extracting my hand. Matteo shook hands next, and I watched Dominic's eyes flick briefly to Matteo's simple watch, his off-the-rack blazer, making calculations I'd seen my father make 1,000 times. So you're a teacher, right? Dominic asked, his tone friendly but faintly condescending. That's admirable work. Really admirable. Admirable. The word people use when they mean noble but pointless. My father appeared from the kitchen carrying his signature scotch, already halfway through the glass. Robert Harrington, he said, extending his hand to Dominic with more warmth than he'd shown Matteo in 4 years of marriage. Heard great things. Private equity, Vanessa tells us. And just like that, Dominic had the floor. We moved to the dining room and I watched the performance unfold exactly as I'd predicted. Dominic held court like a keynote speaker at a conference, my parents hanging on every buzzword-laden sentence. The landscape right now is all about strategic diversification, Dominic said, swirling his wine with casual expertise. You can't just throw capital at opportunities anymore. It's about leveraging predictive analytics to optimize cross-sectoral positioning. My father leaned forward, enchanted. That's exactly right. Too many people chase trends without understanding fundamental value propositions. I had no idea if my father actually understood what Dominic was saying, or if he was just matching energy with someone who sounded impressive. My mother's eyes glittered with satisfaction, the same look she got when her charity galas exceeded fundraising goals. This was exactly what she wanted for Vanessa. Not love, not partnership, but this. A man who could hold his own in conversations about money and markets, who wore the right watch and had the right pedigree. Vanessa beamed beside Dominic, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her laugh a little too loud at his mediocre jokes. She was performing too, playing the role of adoring girlfriend to this impressive man, basking in the reflected glory of his apparent success. I pushed asparagus around my plate and felt Matteo's knee press against mine under the table. Our silent code. We're surviving this together. But something felt different tonight. Even Matteo seemed diminished in a way I hadn't seen before. His shoulders curved inward. His responses to questions came out quieter than usual, almost apologetic. So Matteo, my father said during a brief pause in Dominic's monologue, still teaching American history? Yes, sir, Matteo replied. We just started a unit on Reconstruction. The students are really engaging with the primary source materials. That's good, my father interrupted, already turning back to Dominic. So you were saying about the acquisition pipeline? I watched Matteo's face close off slightly, retreating into himself the way he always did at these dinners. Then Dominic's attention shifted and I felt the temperature in the room drop. So Sienna, he said, his tone still friendly but edged with something sharper, more assessing. Vanessa mentioned you work in HR? The way he said HR made it sound like I managed a complaints department at a call center. Yes, I said, keeping my voice even and professional. I handle talent acquisition and employee relations for a tech company. Ah, tech. Dominic nodded slowly, condescendingly. Must be interesting. You know, I consult with a few tech startups on the side, mostly on the business development end. The HR side is so administrative, you know? Important work, obviously, but not exactly where the real strategy happens. I felt Matteo tense beside me. Someone has to make sure the strategists don't end up in harassment lawsuits, I said lightly. The table offered polite chuckles. That nervous, performative laughter that signals everyone knows an insult just landed but no one wants to acknowledge it. Dominic smiled wider. Touché. But seriously, have you ever thought about pivoting? You seem smart. Maybe transition into something more growth-oriented? Business operations, maybe strategic planning. Before I could respond, my mother jumped in. Sienna's always preferred stability over risk, she said, her voice warm but dismissive. She's very practical that way. There was again. Practical. The word that defined my entire existence in this family. The table murmured agreement. My father nodded like she'd made an excellent point. Vanessa smiled sympathetically, as if my career choices were a chronic condition she'd learned to accept. I felt something crack inside my chest. Small but significant, like the first fracture in a dam before the whole thing breaks. Dominic wasn't finished. Well, nothing wrong with practical, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But you know what they say, real success requires calculated risks. That's how wealth is actually built. He gestured vaguely at the expensive dining room, the implication clear. This is what success looks like, and you'll never achieve it by playing it safe. My father raised his glass slightly in agreement. Dominic turned his attention back to Matteo. And teaching man respect. Seriously. Teachers are heroes. Underpaid heroes, but heroes. He chuckled, shaking his head. I actually considered teaching once, during my gap year before Wharton. Thought I'd teach for America, give back to the community. But then I realized I could make more impact through capital allocation, Help more people by creating jobs and economic opportunity. My father actually nodded like Dominic had just shared profound wisdom. Matteo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His knee pressed harder against mine under the table. The dinner continued, and Dominic's condescension grew bolder with each course. He commented on my dress during the salad course. That's a cute dress, Sienna. I love that color, so classic. Very timeless. Cute. Timeless. All code words for cheap, outdated, something you'd find at a clearance sale. Vanessa giggled. Sienna's always been more understated with fashion. Understated. Another word that meant boring. During the main course, Dominic suggested Matteo look into educational consulting. Seriously, man, you should consider it, he said, cutting into his steak with practiced precision. There's real money in it. These private consulting firms that work with school districts, they pay way better than classroom teaching. You've got the expertise. Might as well get compensated properly for it. The implication was clear. You're wasting your potential on a job that doesn't pay enough. Matteo forced a smile. I appreciate the suggestion. I'll look into it. But he wouldn't. We both knew he loved teaching, loved his students, loved the actual work even if the salary was modest. Then came the comment that finally broke something in me. We were between the main course and dessert when Dominic leaned back in his chair, relaxed and confident, and turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sienna, I have to say, I love your accent. It's charming. Very throwback. Where are you from originally? Rural Pennsylvania, I said quietly. Ah, that makes sense. He nodded like he'd solved a puzzle. It's charming in a throwback kind of way. Very authentic. Charming. Throwback. Authentic. He just called my accent. The slight rural twang I'd never fully lost despite years of trying to soften it. Quaint and outdated. Worth a chuckle but not much else. The table laughed. My mother. My father. Vanessa. And Matteo, my husband, the man who'd promised to honor me, to stand beside me, squeezed my hand under the table and leaned close. Please don't make a scene, he whispered. 5 words that cut deeper than anything Dominic had said all night. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Don't make a scene. I'd spent 29 years not making scenes. So I did what I'd always done. I smiled. Stayed quiet. Let them continue their performance while I disappeared into myself. But inside something had shifted. Dessert arrived on my mother's finest china. Individual servings of tiramisu arranged with the kind of precision that suggested she'd special ordered them from that Italian bakery downtown she loved to mention in conversations. The one where the pastry chef trained in Milan. My mother served each plate personally, a ritual she performed when she wanted to emphasize her role as the perfect hostess. She set one in front of Dominic with a warm smile, then moved around the table with decreasing enthusiasm until she reached me. Enjoy, she said to the table generally, settling back into her seat. Dominic leaned back in his chair, radiating the relaxed confidence of someone who'd won every argument simply by showing up. He dominated the entire dinner, held court for nearly 2 hours, and now he looked completely at ease, like a king surveying his kingdom. He swirled his wine, the deep red catching the candlelight, and launched into what was clearly meant to be his closing argument for why he was the most impressive person in the room. So I'm actually in the middle of this massive acquisition right now, he announced, his voice carrying that casual authority people use when they're about to brag. My firm's acquiring this mid-tier software company, Stream something. Can't remember the exact name off the top of my head. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. It's a decent logistics platform, he continued, completely oblivious. Nothing revolutionary but solid fundamentals. We're planning to gut the existing structure, bring in new leadership, restructure the tech stack, and flip it for triple the valuation. Classic value extraction play. He said it so casually, like he was discussing weekend golf plans, completely unaware that he was describing my company. My company. Streamwave Solutions. The platform I'd built from absolutely nothing 5 years ago when I'd left a toxic corporate HR job and risked everything. Our savings, our stability, my reputation, to create something meaningful. Something that actually helped people. The company that had consumed my nights and weekends for half a decade. The one I'd coded myself in the beginning, sitting at our kitchen table at 2 in the morning because I couldn't afford to hire developers yet. The one that had nearly bankrupted us twice before it finally gained traction. The company that hit 8 figures in revenue last year. And this fraud sitting across from me couldn't even remember its name. That sounds incredibly complex, my mother cooed, her eyes bright with admiration. How do you manage all the moving pieces? Dominic waved his hand dismissively, false modesty practically radiating off him. It's what I do. You develop instincts for these things after enough deals. Knowing which companies have hidden value, understanding market positioning, seeing opportunities other people miss. My father leaned forward, eager to demonstrate his own financial acumen. What's the timeline on something like that? 6 months? A year? We're targeting close in 90 days, Dominic said confidently. Fast execution is key in these situations. You don't want competitors sniffing around once word gets out. Vanessa gazed at him like he just invented currency. That's so impressive, babe. I can't believe you're working on something that big. I sat there, my fork trembling slightly in my hand, feeling a rage so pure and cold it sharpened every thought in my head to crystal clarity. Because I knew, absolutely, unquestionably knew, that Dominic Laurent had zero connection to the actual acquisition team at Apex Capital Partners. I'd sat through every single meeting with Apex. 5 months of negotiations, presentations, due diligence sessions. I'd reviewed every document, every contract draft, every organizational chart. I'd shaken hands with the managing directors, the legal team, the financial analysts. I knew the names of their assistants. I knew which partner took her coffee black and which one had a daughter starting college in the fall. Dominic's name had never appeared once. Not in emails. Not in presentations. Not in the legal paperwork. Not in casual conversation. Not anywhere. He was lying. Completely, entirely, brazenly lying. Using my company, my work, my sacrifice, my success, as a prop to impress my family. And they were believing him. Eating it up like starving people at a feast, asking follow-up questions, nodding approvingly, treating him like the successful one while I sat invisible at the other end of the table. The daughter who'd never amounted to anything was actually the CEO he was pretending to have power over. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. The key, Dominic continued, warming to his subject, is understanding that mid-tier companies like this one don't know their own value. They're usually run by people who stumbled into success. Right place, right time, but no real business sophistication. Our job is to professionalize the operation and unlock the real potential. People who stumbled into success. I'd worked 16-hour days for 2 years straight to build Streamwave. I'd taught myself advanced coding. I'd pitched to 47 investors before finally getting funded. I'd personally handled customer support calls at midnight because we couldn't afford to hire anyone yet. But sure, I'd stumbled into it. My mother sighed contentedly. It's wonderful to see young people with such drive and vision. Don't you think so, Robert? Absolutely, my father agreed, raising his glass slightly toward Dominic. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that separates successful people from everyone else. I felt something inside me snap. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a clean break, like a bone finally giving way under pressure it was never meant to bear. I set down my fork carefully, deliberately, the way you handle something fragile and dangerous. Matteo glanced at me nervously. He knew my expressions well enough to sense the shift, even if he didn't understand what was causing it yet. I pulled out my phone slowly, ignoring his questioning look. My hands felt steadier than they had in years as I navigated to my email and opened the folder labeled Apex Acquisition. 5 months of correspondence, all meticulously organized. Team rosters. Organizational charts. Meeting notes. Legal documents. Everything I needed. Dominic, I said, my voice cutting through his monologue like a knife through silk. The table went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, surprised to hear me speak with such clarity, such purpose. Dominic blinked, clearly not expecting to be interrupted. A flicker of irritation crossed his face before he smoothed it back into politeness. "What firm did you say you work for?" I asked, my tone conversational, almost friendly. He straightened slightly, probably thinking I was finally engaging with his brilliance. "Apex Capital Partners." "Why do you ask? And you're leading the Streamwave acquisition?" "That's right." His confidence was already returning, that smug certainty that he could talk his way through anything. "Why, do you know someone there?" I smiled. Not the tight, performative smile I'd worn for 4 years of Sunday dinners. Not the polite mask I put on to keep peace. This was something else entirely. Something sharp and true and finally free. "Something like that," I said softly. I turned my phone screen toward him, holding it steady so everyone at the table could see if they leaned forward. The email was open, pulled up to the acquisition team roster. Official Apex Capital Partners letterhead at the top. A complete list of every person involved in the Streamwave deal, from managing directors down to junior analysts. "That's interesting," I continued, my voice still calm, still conversational, "because I'm the founder and CEO of Streamwave Solutions. And according to these documents, which I have because I've been in active negotiations with Apex for 5 months, you're not on the acquisition team." Dominic's face went still. "Actually," I said, scrolling deliberately, letting the silence build around us like rising water, "you're not listed as employed by Apex Capital Partners at all." I pulled up another document, the company directory I'd received just last week, complete and current. "In fact," I added, my voice still quiet but carrying clearly in the dead silence, "according to public SEC filings, you were terminated from Apex 6 months ago for ethics violations." The room went nuclear silent. Not polite dinner silent, where people pause their conversation out of courtesy. This was the kind of silence that follows explosions. When everyone's ears are ringing and reality hasn't caught up yet. When the world has fundamentally shifted and no one knows quite how to process it. Dominic's tan face drained of color, going from bronze to the shade of old newspaper in seconds. My mother's wine glass trembled in her hand, the red liquid threatening to spill over the rim. My father's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish trying to breathe air. Vanessa stared at Dominic, her expression shifting from confusion to horror in slow motion, every emotion playing across her perfect features as the truth settled in. And Matteo looked at me like he was seeing his wife for the first time in 4 years of marriage. Really seeing me. The woman who'd been invisible at this table for so long had just become the only person in the room that mattered. I kept my phone steady, the evidence clear and indisputable on the screen. And I waited. Dominic's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. There must be some kind of misunderstanding," he finally managed, his voice lacking all the smooth confidence that had carried him through dinner. "Corporate structures are complicated. Sometimes names don't appear on every document." "These aren't just any documents," I interrupted, my voice still calm, still steady. "These are official team rosters. Legal filings. Communication logs. Your name isn't missing by accident, Dominic. It's missing because you were never part of this deal." His face had gone from newspaper pale to flushed red, panic setting in as his carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time. I wasn't done. Not even close. My fingers moved across my phone screen with absolute certainty, pulling up another file. The adrenaline flooding my system should have made my hands shake, but instead they felt steadier than they had in years. Like I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life without knowing it. "Actually, Dominic, I have more here," I said, scrolling through the documents I'd saved months ago during my due diligence research. "SEC filings are public record, you know. Anyone can access them if they know where to look." I turned the screen toward the table again, angling it so everyone could see clearly. The document header read, "Securities and Exchange Commission, Employment Termination Disclosure." "This is from 6 months ago," I explained, my voice taking on the tone I used in business presentations. Clear, factual, impossible to argue with. Apex Capital Partners filed this disclosure as required by law when they terminated a senior employee for cause. I scrolled down to the relevant section, where Dominic's full name appeared in black and white. "You were let go for falsifying client reports and misrepresenting deal involvement to secure personal bonuses," I read aloud. The investigation found you'd been claiming credit for acquisitions you had no role in, inflating your performance metrics and creating fictional client relationships. Vanessa made a small wounded sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. The kind of noise that escapes when something inside you breaks suddenly and completely. My mother sat frozen, her perfect hostess mask finally cracking like porcelain under pressure. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide, all her careful composure shattered. My father stared at Dominic with an expression I'd never seen before, the look of a man who'd just realized he'd been thoroughly fooled. His analytical mind was clearly recalculating everything, running the numbers on how badly he'd misjudged this situation. So the billion-dollar deal you've been bragging about? I continued, my voice still eerily calm. That's my company. The company I founded 5 years ago. The company I built from nothing while working 70-hour weeks. The company that's actually in acquisition talks with Apex, except you have zero connection to it. I looked directly at Dominic, holding his gaze. You've been lying about everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the classical music that had been playing softly in the background seemed to have stopped, though that might have just been my perception narrowing to this single moment. Dominic's jaw worked soundlessly. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Then he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound so harsh it made my mother flinch. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost all its authority. It came out thin, desperate, the sound of a man drowning and grasping for anything to keep himself afloat. You're taking things out of context. Those documents don't tell the whole story. I'm literally showing you official SEC filings, I replied, still seated, still calm, still holding every bit of power in the room. What context makes fraud acceptable? Vanessa found her voice then, small and shaking, nothing like the confident woman who'd walked in here 2 hours ago. You told me you were promoted, she said, staring at Dominic like she was seeing a stranger. Last month you said they made you a managing director. You showed me an email. Babe, I can explain. Don't call me that. Her voice cracked. Don't you dare call me that right now. Dominic turned to her, reaching for her hand across the table, but Vanessa pulled away like his touch burned. You said you were leading deals, she continued, her voice getting stronger even as tears started sliding down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. You said you were traveling for client meetings. Where were you actually going? He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. I leaned forward slightly, drawing his attention back to me. Explain what, Dominic? I asked, my voice soft but cutting. That you're a fraud? That you've been using my company, my actual work, my actual success, to impress my family while spending the entire evening mocking everything I've built? While calling my job administrative busywork and suggesting I'm not smart enough to do real strategy. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, drifting through the dining room and settling over everyone present. My mother's carefully controlled expression finally shattered completely. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, horror, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. My father set down his scotch glass with a heavy thunk, the sound abnormally loud in the silence. Then Patricia Harrington found her voice. When she spoke, it carried the cold, absolute authority of a woman who'd spent decades managing social disasters and protecting the family image above all else. This was her domain and someone had violated it in the worst possible way. Get out of my house. 3 words. Delivered like a judge's sentence. Final and without appeal. Dominic's head snapped toward her, his expression desperate. Mrs. Harrington, please, if you'd just let me explain. Now. My mother's voice could have frozen water. Get out of my house now. Dominic looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally, someone to defend him or at least question my evidence. Someone to give him the benefit of the doubt. He found nothing but shocked faces and averted eyes. My father wouldn't look at him, staring instead into his scotch like it contained answers to questions he should have asked hours ago. Vanessa had turned away completely, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My mother's face was carved from ice, her judgment absolute. Even Matteo, who usually tried to see the best in people, looked at Dominic with something like disgust. Dominic grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair with shaking hands. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated, nothing like the smooth confidence he'd displayed all evening. This is a misunderstanding, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I can clear this up. I'll send you the real documents, you'll see. Leave, my mother repeated, standing now, her full height and presence commanding the room. And don't contact my daughter again. Any of my daughters. Dominic looked at Vanessa one last time, his expression pleading, but she wouldn't turn around. He walked to the front door, his footsteps echoing through the suddenly too quiet house. The door opened, closed. The sound echoed through the dining room like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. And then he was gone. In the silence that followed, I could hear everything with strange clarity. The ticking of my mother's antique clock in the hallway. The soft sound of Vanessa crying. My father's heavy breathing. The blood rushing in my own ears. My mother sank back into her chair slowly, moving like someone much older than she was. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, gripping each other so tightly her knuckles had gone white. My father poured himself another scotch with mechanical precision, his movements automatic like a man going through familiar motions while his brain rebooted everything he thought he knew. Vanessa's tears were quiet but steady, the kind of crying you do when you realize you've been publicly humiliated. When you've been thoroughly fooled and everyone witnessed it. And Matteo sat beside me, his presence suddenly different than it had been all night. His hand found mine under the table, not the warning squeeze from earlier but something else. Something that felt like support. Like awe. Like he was finally actually seeing me. His eyes were wide, his expression a mixture of shock and what looked like fear. Not fear of me but fear of how wrong he'd been. How thoroughly he'd underestimated the woman he'd married. The silence stretched out, heavy and complicated, filled with too many emotions to name. Finally my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, stripped of all its usual authority and control. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her directly, meeting her eyes for maybe the first time in years without immediately looking away. About your company, she continued, her voice shaking slightly. About any of this. About who you really are. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of assumptions and dismissals and casual cruelties. I could have said so many things. I could have listed every time they'd talked over me, every accomplishment they'd ignored, every moment they'd introduced me as our practical one, while celebrating Vanessa's smallest achievements. But I didn't. Instead I said simply, you never asked. The truth of it settled over the table like ash after a fire. Soft and gray and impossible to brush away. They'd never asked because they'd never thought to ask. Never imagined I could be anything more than what they'd decided I was. Practical, boring, safe, small, settled, disappointing. The daughter who didn't quite measure up. Except I'd measured up just fine. They'd just been using the wrong ruler. The silence after those words, you never asked, felt like it had physical weight pressing down on everyone at the table. Vanessa was the first to move. She pushed back her chair with a scraping sound that broke the stillness, stood without looking at any of us and walked toward the stairs. I watched her go, her movements stiff and mechanical like someone in shock trying to remember how their body worked. Her footsteps on the stairs were heavy, deliberate. Then came the sound of her old bedroom door closing. Not slamming, just closing with a finality that somehow felt worse than anger would have. A moment later I could hear the muffled sounds of crying through the ceiling. Soft at first, then louder, the kind of crying that comes when you finally stop trying to hold it together. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. She began clearing plates with sharp, angry movements that had nothing to do with actual cleaning and everything to do with needing something, anything, to do with her hands. Silverware clattered against china with jarring loudness. A fork fell to the floor and she left it there, moving to the next plate with jerky, aggressive efficiency. My father sat completely motionless, still staring into his scotch glass like it held answers to questions he hadn't known existed an hour ago. His face had gone slack, all the usual analytical sharpness replaced with something that looked like genuine confusion. Matteo finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. We should probably go. He said it gently, like someone trying not to startle a wounded animal. His hand was still holding mine under the table, but the grip felt different now. Less supportive, more desperate, like he was anchoring himself to something familiar while everything else shifted around him. My mother stopped mid-motion, a dessert plate suspended in her hands. She stood frozen like that for a long moment, staring at the half-eaten tiramisu, before setting it down carefully on the sideboard. Wait, she said. Something in her voice was different. Smaller. All the usual command and authority had drained out of it, leaving behind something I'd never heard from Patricia Harrington before. Uncertainty. Sienna, she stopped, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words that apparently didn't exist. Her hands gripped the edge of the sideboard, knuckles white. I need to understand. She turned to face me fully, and I saw that her perfect composure had completely shattered. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her lipstick had worn off hours ago. She looked older, smaller, like someone had deflated her from the inside. You own a company, she said slowly, carefully, like someone learning a foreign language. Worth how much? I met her gaze steadily, not looking away this time, not making myself smaller to fit her comfort level. 8 figures in revenue last year, I said clearly. We're currently in acquisition talks with Apex Capital Partners and 2 other major investment firms. The projected valuation is between 40 and 60 million, depending on which offer we accept. My father's head snapped up so fast I heard his neck crack. The number had finally penetrated his shock, cut through the fog of scotch and embarrassment and reached the part of his brain that understood what those figures actually meant. 60 million, he repeated, his voice hoarse. You built a $60 million company. Built and currently run, I confirmed. I have 43 employees across 3 offices. We serve over 200 corporate clients. Last quarter we expanded into the European market. My mother lowered herself slowly back into her chair, like her legs had stopped working properly. And we never knew, she whispered. No, I agreed. You never knew. Matteo's hand tightened on mine and I turned to look at him. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock definitely. But something else underneath it, something that looked uncomfortably like fear. We should go, he said again, quieter this time. Let your family process this. But he wasn't thinking about my family. I could see it in the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, the way his free hand kept rubbing his knee, a nervous habit he had when something made him deeply uncomfortable. He was the one who needed to process. Can we talk? I asked him quietly. Privately. He nodded, looking relieved to have an excuse to move, to do something other than sit in this room filled with the wreckage of assumptions. We stood and I followed him into the hallway, away from my parents who remained frozen in the dining room like figures in a painting of a disaster. Matteo walked until we were near the front door, far enough that our voices wouldn't carry clearly back to the dining room. He turned to face me and for the first time in our 4 years of marriage I saw him look at me like I was a stranger. You own an 8-figure company, he said slowly, testing the words like they might be lies. You're in talks to sell it for $60 million. Yes. And you never told me. This time it wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in confusion. I looked at him, really looked at the man I'd married. The high school history teacher who loved his students and graded papers at our kitchen table and made terrible jokes about the Constitutional Convention. The man who'd promised to honor me, to support me, to be my partner in everything. The man who'd whispered, please don't make a scene, while a stranger mocked everything about me. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. If I'd told you 2 years ago or a year ago or even 6 months ago, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was exaggerating or gotten lucky, or somehow stumbled into success the way Dominic described? He flinched and I had my answer. Sienna. I'm tired, Matteo. The words came out heavier than I intended, weighted with 4 years of shrinking myself, of playing small, of apologizing for existing in spaces that were supposed to celebrate me. I'm so tired of being the disappointing daughter. Tired of being the boring sister. Tired of being the wife who needs to behave and not make scenes. My voice cracked slightly on the last words and I hated that it did, hated showing weakness now when I'd been so strong just minutes ago. I built something real, I continued. Something meaningful that actually helps people and creates jobs and changes how companies think about human resources. And I've been hiding it, hiding myself, because this family only respects success when it comes packaged the right way. When it looks impressive enough, sounds important enough, makes them look good enough. Matteo's expression shifted, shame mixing with what looked like genuine realization washing over his features. I should have defended you, he said quietly, his voice rough. Tonight. Every Sunday night for the past 4 years. Every time your father dismissed your work or your mother introduced you as our practical one. I let them make you feel small because it was easier than confronting them. Because I was He stopped, swallowed hard. I was scared of them. Of their judgment. Of not measuring up in their world. The admission hung between us, honest and painful. I'm sorry, he added. I'm so sorry, Sienna. The apology was genuine. I could hear it in his voice, see it in the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. But it also felt late, like flowers brought to a funeral. Beautiful, meaningful, but unable to change what had already happened. Yes, I said simply. You should have. We stood there in the hallway, surrounded by family photos on the walls. Pictures of holidays and graduations and celebrations that suddenly felt like evidence of a life I'd never actually lived. A life where I was always in the background, always slightly out of focus, always just barely included in the frame. I wondered if our marriage could survive this. If Mateo could handle being married to the version of me that existed outside this house. The version that ran board meetings and negotiated with investors and made decisions that affected dozens of people's livelihoods. Or if he needed me to stay small, stay quiet, stay the version of Sienna that fit comfortably into his world. Before I could voice any of those thoughts, my mother appeared at the end of the hallway. Her perfect posture had wilted, her shoulders curved inward in a way I'd never seen before. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Stay, she said, and it came out more like a plea than the command I was used to. Please. We need to talk about this. Really talk. I looked at Mateo, searching his face for some indication of what he was thinking, what he needed. He nodded slowly. I think we should, he said quietly. I think we all need to. I turned back to my mother and made a decision that surprised even me. Hey, I said. Let's talk. We moved to the living room, neutral territory, away from the dining room that still held the ruins of dinner and Dominic's exposure. My mother sat in her usual chair, but she perched on the edge of it instead of settling back with her usual regal posture. My father joined us a moment later, carrying his scotch like a lifeline. He lowered himself into his leather armchair and suddenly looked every one of his 63 years. The sharp, analytical man who'd intimidated me my entire life looked lost, confused, like someone had pulled the foundation out from under everything he thought he knew. I sat on the couch, Mateo beside me but not touching me, a careful space maintained between us. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara smudged down her cheeks, all her careful beauty routine destroyed by tears. She came down slowly, holding the banister like she needed the support, and curled into the corner of the opposite couch like a wounded animal seeking shelter. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, filled with too many unsaid things. Finally, my father cleared his throat. I've been a fool, he said. The words clearly cost him something. Robert Harrington had built his entire identity on being right, on being smarter than everyone else in the room, on understanding value and worth with precision. We've been fools, he continued, looking at my mother, then at me. We measured you by standards you never agreed to. We ignored everything that didn't fit our narrow definition of success. And his voice cracked slightly. We made you feel invisible in your own family. My mother nodded, and I saw tears threatening her carefully applied mascara. I thought I was teaching you girls to be strong, she said softly. To be ambitious. To reach for success. But I was just teaching you to perform. To put on a show for everyone else instead of building something real. She looked at Vanessa, then turned her gaze to me. And somewhere along the way I stopped seeing my daughters. I stopped seeing you as people and started seeing you as projects to manage. Accomplishments to showcase. Extensions of my own image instead of human beings with your own paths. The admission hung in the air, raw and painful and years overdue. And for the first time in my life I saw my mother cry. I didn't sleep well that night. Mateo and I had driven home from my parents' house in silence, the kind that felt less comfortable than suffocating. He tried to hold my hand across the center console, but I'd pulled away, not angry, just exhausted. Too tired to comfort him when I had nothing left for myself. When we got home, I'd gone straight to bed while he stayed up in the living room, the glow of his laptop visible under the bedroom door. I could hear him moving around, making tea he probably wouldn't drink, doing anything to avoid coming to bed and facing the conversation we both knew was waiting. I must have fallen asleep around 2 because when my phone started buzzing at 7 in the morning, I jolted awake, disoriented and gritty-eyed. 17 missed calls. I blinked at the screen, my brain still foggy with sleep, trying to understand why my phone looked like someone had died. 3 calls from my mother. 5 from Vanessa. 2 from my father, which was unusual because he never called me directly. 4 from numbers I didn't recognize. And 3 from my business partner, Marcus, who knew better than to call me on a Monday morning unless something was seriously wrong. Then I saw the family group chat. 64 new messages since midnight. My stomach dropped. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to pound, and opened the chat. The messages scrolled past in a blur. My mother's friends asking if everything was all right. Distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly very concerned about my well-being. Even my father's golf buddy chiming in with a cryptic, "Saw the news. Call if you need anything." What news? I scrolled back to find the source and found a message from Vanessa, posted at 11:43 last night. "I'm so sorry. Emma posted about dinner. It's everywhere." My hands went cold. I opened my personal social media, something I rarely checked, and saw that I'd been tagged in dozens of posts overnight. The notifications kept coming, my phone buzzing continuously in my hand like something alive and angry. The original post was from Emma Chin, Vanessa's friend who'd apparently stopped by during dessert. I vaguely remembered her poking her head into the dining room to say hello to my mother before the Dominic situation exploded. She'd witnessed everything. And she'd posted about it. Not a video, thank God. But a detailed blow-by-blow account written with the kind of breathless excitement people reserve for witnessing car crashes or celebrity meltdowns. "Just witnessed the most insane family dinner of my life," Emma's post began. "The quietest woman at the table, literally has said maybe 5 words all night, absolutely destroyed her sister's rich boyfriend by casually revealing she's secretly a millionaire and he's been lying about everything." The silence that followed. I can't. The man went from bragging about acquiring her company, that he didn't know was hers, to getting kicked out of the house in under 5 minutes. This woman is my new hero. The post had been shared 4,000 times. 4,000. It had hundreds of comments, people I'd never met discussing me like I was a character in a TV show they were binge-watching. This is the energy I need in 2024. The quiet ones are always the most dangerous. I need this woman's name so I can apply to work for her company. Imagine spending a whole dinner mocking someone and then finding out they're your boss's boss's boss. My phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus, my business partner. "You're a meme. Check Twitter. Also call me ASAP." With shaking hands I opened Twitter. The Quiet Tech CEO was trending. Someone had found my LinkedIn profile and posted a screenshot. Another person had found Streamwave Solutions' website and shared it with the caption, "This is the company the fraud was pretending to acquire." A third had created a whole thread analyzing power moves by underestimated women in male-dominated spaces. I was being celebrated as some kind of folk hero for introverts and overlooked women everywhere. One tweet with 20,000 likes read, "She sat there through an entire dinner of insults and just waited for the perfect moment to pull out receipts. This is chess, not checkers." Another, "The fact that her own husband told her not to make a scene and she still took this man down is incredible." She said, "I'm making the scene." I felt like I was watching my life become public property in real time, like someone had taken my most private family moment and turned it into entertainment for strangers. My bedroom door opened quietly. Matteo stood there holding 2 mugs of coffee, his hair messy from sleep, his expression cautious. "You're awake," he said softly. "I thought I heard your phone." "I'm trending on Twitter," I said, my voice flat. He winced. "I know. I've been up for a few hours. I wanted to let you sleep, but, yeah. It's everywhere." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, offering me one of the mugs. The gesture felt significant somehow, like he was trying to rebuild something he'd let crack through years of neglect. I took the coffee but didn't drink it, just wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and stared at my phone screen. "You're trending," Matteo said again unnecessarily. He pulled out his own phone and showed me. The story had evolved beyond Emma's original post. People were doing deep dives into my background, finding old articles about Streamwave Solutions funding rounds, sharing screenshots of my company's client list. A tech journalist from a major publication had already sent an interview request to my business email. My work inbox, which I'd checked despite it being barely past 7 in the morning, had 47 new messages. Half from reporters wanting quotes or interviews. Half from potential clients who apparently liked the idea of working with the woman who took down a fraud at Sunday dinner. I felt overwhelmed and vindicated in equal measure, riding a wave I hadn't intended to create but couldn't deny feeling powerful upon. I called in sick today, Matteo said quietly, setting his phone aside. I looked up at him surprised. Matteo never called in sick. He was the teacher who showed up with a fever because his students had a test scheduled. Why? Because my wife is a CEO, he said, meeting my eyes for the first time since last night. Because I've been treating her like she's invisible for 4 years. Because I owe you more than an apology whispered in a hallway while your family falls apart. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he continued. About what you said. About how I've let your family make you small because it was easier than standing up to them. About how I told you not to make a scene when you had every right to defend yourself. He rubbed his face with both hands, looking exhausted. I was wrong, Sienna. About all of it. And I'm sorry. Before I could respond, my phone rang. My mother's number. I looked at Matteo, who nodded. Put it on speaker, he said. I should hear this too. I answered and placed the phone on the bed between us. Sienna. My mother's voice came through, strained but determined, nothing like her usual controlled composure. I know you're probably overwhelmed right now. I know we have a lot to work through. But I need you to know something. She paused and I heard her take a shaky breath. Vanessa confronted your father and me last night. After you left. Really confronted us for the first time in her entire life. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was coming. She said we'd created a family where only certain kinds of success mattered, my mother continued, her voice getting thicker. Where she felt constant pressure to date impressive men and have an impressive career just to earn our approval. She said she's been performing for us her whole life and she's exhausted. I heard my mother's breath hitch. She said watching you finally speak up gave her permission to do the same. She said if you could stand up to Dominic and to us after years of being dismissed, then she could too. There was a pause and I heard muffled conversation in the background. My father's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. Your father wants me to tell you something, my mother said. He says, her voice cracked completely. He says he's proud of you. That he's always been proud, he just didn't know how to show it. That he measured everything by the wrong standards and he's sorry. I felt tears prick my eyes despite myself. We're sorry, Sienna, my mother whispered. For all of it. For making you invisible. For celebrating Vanessa's performance while ignoring your actual achievements. For creating a home where you felt like you had to hide who you really were. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely. Matteo reached over and squeezed my hand. I know this doesn't fix anything, my mother continued. I know we have a long way to go. But I wanted you to know that we see you now. Really see you. And we're so sorry it took something like this for us to finally look. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there in bed, coffee going cold in my hands, staring at the phone. Matteo pulled me into a hug and this time I let him, burying my face in his shoulder as the tears finally came. Not sad tears exactly, but something more complicated. Relief mixed with grief, mixed with exhaustion, mixed with hope. By afternoon the story had taken another turn. Someone, I never found out who, had leaked detailed information about Dominic's professional history to his industry network. His LinkedIn profile, which had claimed he was still a managing director at Apex Capital Partners and listed the Streamwave acquisition as his personal achievement, disappeared within hours. Former colleagues started commenting, confirming he'd been terminated for ethics violations. Industry contacts shared that he'd been working as a freelance consultant for months, which everyone in finance knew was code for unemployed and looking. His entire house of cards collapsed in less than 24 hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. The first she'd sent me directly since the dinner. Emma told me what she posted. I'm so sorry it went viral. I told her to take it down but the damage is done. But also, thank you. A second message followed immediately. I did background checks on every guy I've dated for the past 2 years. Every single one. And this is the first time I actually checked. Really checked. And you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Then a third message. Also, I applied for a real job today. Junior marketing coordinator at an actual company. No more fake consulting. No more pretending to be something I'm not. No more dating guys to impress mom and dad. I stared at the messages, feeling something shift in my chest. Maybe truth didn't just expose lies. Maybe it freed the people trapped inside them. The week that followed felt surreal, like living in the aftermath of an earthquake where everything looked the same but nothing was quite stable. The viral posts eventually died down, replaced by newer controversies and celebrity gossip. My inbox slowly returned to manageable levels. The media requests tapered off after I politely declined all of them through Marcus, who handled it with his usual efficiency. But the real changes were happening quietly in places the internet couldn't see. Vanessa texted me every day. Small things at first. Memes, screenshots of job applications, a photo of her in business casual clothes with the caption, "Is this too boring for an interview?" But then the messages got deeper. Longer. More vulnerable. "I've been thinking about why I dated guys like Dominic," she wrote on Thursday. "I think I needed dad to be proud of me. Needed mom to show me off. And I let that need turn me into someone I don't even recognize. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sent back a heart emoji and, 'I'm here if you want to talk.'" He called me that night. We talked for 2 hours about things we'd never discussed before. The pressure of being the favorite, the loneliness of performing constantly, the fear of being ordinary. "You were always braver than me," she said quietly near the end of the call. "You just did what you wanted without needing their approval. I couldn't do that. I needed their approval too," I admitted. "I just stopped waiting for it." On Saturday morning my mother called. "Sunday dinner," she said without preamble. "Just the 4 of us. No performances, no guests, no expectations. Just family." She paused and I could hear her take a breath. "Will you come? Please." Matteo was watching me from across the kitchen table, his coffee halfway to his mouth, clearly trying to read my expression. "Hey," I said. "We'll be there." When we pulled into my parents' driveway Sunday evening, my stomach was tight with nerves despite everything. Some habits die hard and years of dreading these dinners had left their mark. But something was different the moment my mother opened the door. She was wearing jeans. Actual denim jeans, not the designer kind she wore to charity brunches, but regular worn-in Levi's paired with a simple navy sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail instead of her usual styled perfection. No pearls. Minimal makeup. She looked more like a regular mom than I'd ever seen her. "Sienna." "Matteo." She stepped forward and hugged me longer than usual, holding on like she was afraid I might disappear. When she pulled back, I saw her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying recently, but they were clear. Focused. "Thank you for coming," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Inside the house felt different. Quieter. Less staged. Like someone had finally turned off the show lights and let reality seep back in. The dining room table was set simply. No elaborate centerpiece, no color-coordinated napkins, no crystal glasses that cost more than my monthly utilities. Just regular dishes, regular silverware, a simple vase with grocery store flowers. And the smell coming from the kitchen was unfamiliar. "Dad cooked," Vanessa said from behind me, and I turned to see her standing in the living room doorway. She looked younger somehow. She'd pulled her hair into a messy bun, wore minimal makeup, and was dressed in leggings and an oversized sweater instead of her usual designer ensemble. Without all the armor, she looked more like the sister I remembered from childhood, before everything became a competition, before every interaction became a performance. She crossed the room quickly and hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered against my shoulder. "For laughing. For not seeing you. For being part of the problem for so long. For everything." I hugged her back, feeling my throat tighten. "I know. It's okay." "It's not okay," she said, pulling back to look at me. "But I'm going to try to do better. We all are." My father appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," a gag gift from years ago that I'd never actually seen him wear. He had a dish towel slung over his shoulder and looked slightly frazzled in a way that was oddly endearing. "Dinner's almost ready," he announced. "I made pot roast. Or attempted to. We'll see if it's edible." The meal was imperfect. The roast slightly overdone, the potatoes a bit mushy, the vegetables underseasoned. But it was real. My father had actually stood in the kitchen and cooked it himself, not hired caterers or supervised staff. That mattered more than perfect seasoning. Dinner was awkward at first. Years of dysfunction don't evaporate over pot roast, and we all seemed acutely aware of the invisible weight sitting at the table with us. All the things unsaid for so long, all the hurt that had accumulated, all the patterns we were trying to break. But slowly, tentatively we started talking. Not performing. Not competing. Just talking. My father asked about Streamwave Solutions, and this time it wasn't polite small talk. He asked real questions. About the technology, about the business model, about the challenges I'd faced scaling the company. He listened to my answers with genuine curiosity, asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually trying to understand. How did you handle the funding rounds? He asked. That must have been intense, especially starting from nothing. I found myself explaining the early days, the 47 rejections before we finally got funded, the nights I'd spent perfecting pitch decks while working full-time to keep the lights on. My father listened intently, nodding. That took real courage, he said quietly. More than I had at your age. My mother asked Matteo about his students, and this time she didn't have that tight smile. She actually engaged with his stories, laughed at the funny parts, asked genuine questions about his teaching philosophy. There's this kid in my third period, Matteo said, warming to his subject the way he always did when talking about his students. Came in convinced he hated history. Thought it was all dead people and memorizing dates. But we've been doing this project where they research their own family histories, and he discovered his great-grandfather was part of the Tuskegee Airmen. That's wonderful, my mother said, and she actually meant it. What a gift to help kids connect with their own stories. Vanessa shared about the job she'd applied for, junior marketing coordinator at a mid-size firm, nothing glamorous or impressive by our family's old standards, but real and stable and honest. I'm terrified, she admitted, pushing food around her plate. I don't even know if I'm good at anything real. Everything I've done for the past 5 years has been smoke and mirrors. What if I can't actually do normal work? Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way I'd never heard from her. My mother reached across the table and took her hand. Then you'll learn, she said firmly. You'll make mistakes and you'll learn from them and you'll get better. And we'll be here while you do. Really here, not just watching and judging from the sidelines. Supporting you. Believing in you. She squeezed Vanessa's hand. Not performing for us, she added quietly. Just being you. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears and she nodded. After dinner, my father asked me to step outside with him. We moved to the back patio, the evening air cool and quiet, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. He stood at the railing, hands in his pockets, staring out at the yard. The landscaping lights had come on automatically, casting everything in soft amber. I owe you more than an apology, he said finally, not looking at me. More than just saying I'm sorry and hoping that fixes things. He turned to face me and I saw how uncomfortable he was with this kind of emotional honesty. It would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. This man who'd commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, struggling to tell his daughter how he felt. I measured your worth by standards I didn't even believe in, he continued. I built my whole life around wealth and status and appearances. And then I forced those metrics onto my daughters without ever asking what you actually wanted. What would make you happy? His voice was rough, strained. You built something meaningful, Sienna. You took risks I was too afraid to take. You succeeded by actually helping people, not just moving money around. And he stopped, swallowed hard. I mocked you for it. Dismissed it. Made you feel small because I didn't understand it. Because it didn't fit into my narrow definition of success. I could see how much the admission cost him. I'm proud of you, he said, his voice cracking. So incredibly proud. I should have said that years ago. Should have celebrated what you were building instead of comparing you to some imaginary standard that didn't even matter. I felt tears prick my eyes and didn't try to blink them back this time. I needed to hear that, I said quietly. For so long I needed to hear that. He nodded, his own eyes wet. I know. And I'm sorry I made you wait. We stood there in comfortable silence as the evening darkened around us, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt truly seen by my father. Before Matteo and I left, my mother pressed a small envelope into my hand. Read this when you get home, she said. Please. In the car I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter. 3 pages of my mother's precise handwriting, the same script that had addressed 1,000 charity gala invitations and thank you notes. But this was different. Dear Sienna, it began. I've started this letter a dozen times and deleted it a dozen times trying to find the right words. But I've realized there are no right words for what I need to say. There's just the truth. The letter went on for 3 pages, unflinching and honest in a way I'd never seen from my mother. She admitted to years of emotional manipulation disguised as high standards. Apologized for creating a home where love felt conditional on performance. Acknowledged that she'd spent so long controlling how the family looked that she'd forgotten to see who we actually were. "I've started therapy," she wrote near the end. "I'm trying to understand why I needed everyone to be perfect instead of just letting them be real. Why I measured my worth as a mother by how impressive my daughters appeared instead of how happy they were." The last paragraph was simple. "I don't expect forgiveness immediately. I just want you to know I'm trying to change. That I see the damage I've done and I'm committed to doing better. You deserved better from me. You always did." She'd signed it simply, "Mom." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse. "That's a start," I said quietly to myself. Not a resolution. Not a fairy tale ending where everything was suddenly perfect. But a genuine beginning. Matteo reached over and took my hand as we drove home through the quiet streets. "Your family's actually trying," he said, and he sounded surprised. "Yeah," I agreed, lacing my fingers through his. "So are we." 3 months passed like pages turning in a book I was still learning to read. The acquisition closed in early December, finalized with signatures and handshakes and champagne in a conference room that overlooked the city. I'd negotiated to stay on as CEO through the transition period and beyond, maintaining control of the company's direction while gaining the resources to scale faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Marcus had hugged me after the final signing, whispering, "You did it. You actually did it." And I had. On a cold January morning, I stood in my corner office at Streamwave Solutions, newly renovated, twice the size of my old space, looking out over the city skyline. Snow was falling lightly, dusting the buildings in white, and I tried to recognize the woman reflected faintly in the glass. She looked taller somehow. More solid. Less like someone apologizing for taking up space. The viral story had faded from the internet's collective memory, replaced by newer scandals and fresher content. But it had left ripples in its wake. Unexpected opportunities that kept appearing like gifts I hadn't asked for but was learning to accept. Speaking invitations from women's business organizations. Mentorship requests from young entrepreneurs who saw themselves in my story. Messages from strangers who felt invisible in their own families, thanking me for showing them it was possible to speak up. A business magazine had reached out last month wanting to do a profile. The quiet CEO who became an unlikely voice for the underestimated. I'd hesitated, my instinct still to stay small, stay private, stay invisible. But then I'd remembered that dinner. That moment when I'd finally stopped shrinking. And I'd said yes. Not because I wanted fame or attention. But because I'd learned that staying silent didn't protect you. It just made you smaller. And maybe my story could help someone else find their voice sooner than I'd found mine. My assistant, Claire, knocked gently on the open door. "Your sister's here for lunch," she said with a smile. "Thanks. Send her in." Vanessa appeared a moment later, bundled in a winter coat, her cheeks pink from the cold. She'd cut her hair shorter, wore less makeup, dressed in business casual instead of designer labels. She looked more real somehow. More herself. "Hey," she said, crossing the office to hug me. "Sorry I'm late. The subway was a nightmare." "You took the subway?" I raised an eyebrow. The old Vanessa would have taken an Uber and expensed it to our parents. She laughed. "I'm on a budget now. Real job, real salary, real life. It's shockingly humbling." We'd started meeting for lunch every week after that first Sunday dinner, slowly rebuilding a relationship we'd never really had. Learning each other as adults instead of competitors. Discovering we actually liked each other when we weren't performing for an audience. I ordered sandwiches from the cafe downstairs, and we settled into the chairs by the window, the city spread out below us. "So how's the job?" I asked, unwrapping my turkey sandwich. Vanessa's face lit up in a way I'd never seen before. Genuine excitement, not the performative enthusiasm she used to display. "It's good. Really good, actually. I mean, I'm terrible at it sometimes," she admitted, laughing. "Last week I completely messed up a client presentation because I forgot to save the final version. Had to present the draft with typos and missing graphics. It was mortifying." "What happened?" "My boss helped me fix it and we rescheduled. And then she sat me down and gave me actual constructive feedback instead of just firing me or making me feel worthless." Vanessa shook her head, still seeming amazed by this. "And you know what's weird? I actually care about getting better. Like I went home and practiced my presentation skills. Watched YouTube tutorials. Asked for extra training. She paused, picking at her napkin. I spent so long performing for mom and dad that I forgot what it felt like to just be, she said quietly. To fail and try again without an audience judging whether I'm impressive enough. To work on something because I want to improve, not because I need to prove my worth. I understood completely. We'd both been performing different roles our entire lives. Her as the golden child, me as the disappointment. But we'd both been equally trapped in the script our parents had written. I'm glad you're finding yourself, I said. The real you. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I'm 27. Feels late to be figuring out who I actually am. Better late than never. I guess. She took a bite of her sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. Mom asked if we'd both come to dinner next Sunday. Together, I mean. She's been cooking herself now. No catering, no elaborate themes. Just food and conversation. I nodded. I'll be there. Sunday dinners had become something different over the past 3 months. Smaller, quieter, more honest. My parents were trying, genuinely trying, to build something real instead of something impressive. It wasn't perfect. Years of dysfunction didn't disappear overnight. There were still awkward moments, stilted conversations, old patterns trying to reassert themselves. But they were trying. We all were. Family wasn't fixed overnight, but we were building something real from the ruins of what we'd pretended to be. That evening, Mateo and I sat on our apartment balcony despite the cold, bundled in blankets, watching the sun set over the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and deep purple, the kind of sunset that makes you believe in beauty even when everything else feels complicated. He'd been different these past 3 months. More present. More attentive. Actively working to see me, really see me, instead of the version of me that was easier to manage or ignore. We'd started couples therapy in November. Once a week, sitting in a small office with a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, working through years of unspoken resentments and unmet needs. It was hard work. Painful sometimes. But necessary. I'm proud of you, Mateo said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. I turned to look at him. For what? Not for the company or the money or any of that, he said, meeting my eyes. I'm proud that you stopped making yourself small for people who should have celebrated you from the beginning. He took my hand, lacing our fingers together. Including me, he added, his voice rough. Especially me. I should have seen you. Should have defended you. Should have made you feel like you were enough exactly as you were. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of being truly seen for the first time in my adult life. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I'm proud of me too, I admitted quietly. That's new. He kissed the top of my head. Good. You should be. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, the city lights beginning to twinkle on one by one. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Vanessa. Thank you for today. For being patient with me while I figure myself out. I love you. I smiled and typed back, love you too. Later that night, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, I pulled out my mother's letter from the nightstand drawer where I'd kept it for the past 3 months. The paper was soft now from repeated handling, the folds worn. I'd read it dozens of times, finding new meaning in the words each time. The apologies were specific, detailed, honest in a way that suggested real self-reflection rather than performative guilt designed to make herself feel better. She'd written about her own mother, the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, the way she'd internalized those impossible standards and passed them down to us without realizing the damage she was doing. I thought love meant pushing you to be better, she'd written. I didn't understand that real love means accepting who you already are. At the bottom of the final page, she'd added something that had stuck with me since the first reading. I spent your whole life teaching you that a lady knows when to speak and when to listen. I was wrong. A strong woman knows when her voice matters, and then she uses it regardless of who's uncomfortable. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer, an artifact of transformation that I'd probably keep for the rest of my life. For 29 years I'd been the quiet one. The invisible daughter who learned early that her voice didn't matter as much as her sister's. The disappointing child who could never quite measure up to standards she'd never agreed to. The wife who needed to behave, to not make scenes, to keep the peace at the cost of her own dignity. But silence was never weakness. It was strategy. It was observation. It was gathering strength while everyone else assumed I had none. And when I'd finally spoken, when I'd finally stopped shrinking myself to fit their comfortable expectations, I hadn't just exposed one liar. I'd freed an entire family from the prison of perfection they'd built around themselves. My parents were learning to be real instead of impressive. Vanessa was discovering who she was beneath the performance. Mateo was learning to see me instead of the idea of me he'd married. And I was learning that my voice had always mattered. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to use it. The quiet ones aren't weak. We're not invisible because we lack substance. We're not silent because we have nothing to say. We're just strategic, patient, observant, waiting for the moment when our words will have the most impact. And when that moment comes, when we finally decide to speak, to stand up, to take up the space we've always deserved, we don't miss. We don't waver. We don't apologize. We just tell the truth. And the truth, I'd learned, is the most powerful weapon anyone can wield. I turned off the bedside lamp and settled into bed beside Mateo, who was already asleep, his breathing slow and even. For the first time in my adult life, I felt at peace with who I was. Not perfect. Not impressive by anyone's standards but my own. Just real. Just enough. Just me. And that, finally, was more than good enough. This story of quiet power and perfect timing had you hooked. Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sienna calmly pulled out her phone and revealed she was the CEO Dominic was lying about. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss